obfuscation your purported bank imposes upon us. We believe all reasonable people will deduce, accordingly therefore, that your evasion of our first vital fact of no lawful consideration and no commensurable fact of debt purposely circumvents admission of a nonetheless obvious fact that the purported banking system creates money by no more than publishing evidence of the people's promissory obligations to each other. Obviously, too, then, your evasion is an inadvertent indication that you are powerless to argue otherwise. For certainly you would, this is a Freedom of Information Act request, a furtherance of one. Obviously, too, then, your evasion is an inadvertent indication that you are powerless to argue otherwise. For certainly you would have taken up the opportunity and obligation to prove a fact of lawful consideration, particularly as that fact would naturally be so obvious were you prepared to justify the consequences of your purposed obfuscation of our currency. Your cited pages, in fact, however, do not even provide the scantest hint that the Bank of England itself even considers it incumbent upon itself even to make a reasonable effort to explain how the resultant falsified debts could possibly be justified either by lawful consideration or by any other reasonable rationale. You too, remarkably, deny us any reasonable answer which could possibly justify the very concept, the principle, is ever the rightful property of the purported banking system. Of course, we're very prepared to argue further. Therefore, the only reasonable deduction in regard to this further concerted evasion of vital justifying arguments is that the existence of the bank is itself perfectly well aware that the obfuscations of the bank were never even intended from their inception to serve the people who are forced instead to suffer the banking system's purposed injustices as a consequence of your purposed obfuscation. Yet obviously there is neither any presumable nor any indicated lawful consideration in the bank's obfuscation of our promissory obligations into falsified debts to the purported bank. For the real creditor gives up property for the promissory obligation, and the resultant obligation, therefore, is to pay and to retire principal from circulation. While it claims otherwise, even in the very propaganda you have pointed us to, nonetheless, then, the purported banking system is not even a real creditor. In fact, then, not only does the banking system give up no lawful consideration in obfuscating this obligation to retire payments of principal from circulation, which in turn are the property of no one, nor therefore is there any commensurable property of the bank at risk which could even possibly ostensibly justify interest. So we are stating these claims outright to the bank for the bank to invalidate them with irrefutable arguments, if they could possibly possess such a thing, which of course is impossible, because the bank doesn't give up any lawful consideration, because no property is at risk to the bank which justifies interest, much less interest to the bank. Our letter continues. If we could possibly be in error in these careful deductions, please therefore furnish exactly which passages of the cited documents indeed conclusively resolve these issues otherwise. He's in a corner there. Otherwise, let it be recorded then that as we are also aware, neither your cited pages nor any other prior material answer any of our other vital questions. We therefore anticipate that you will understand the motives of your evasion. In fact, because if your obfuscation of the currency were justifiable, and of course, if you did not already know that it is impossible to justify it, you could have simply answered that lawful consideration, what lawful consideration the purported bank indeed gives up in the creation of money. If there is none, neither then could you answer directly that there is any, which indeed, of course, is why he hasn't. Knowing yourself so, and participating in that obfuscation for your own livelihood, nonetheless, you steered us this vital test of integrity to documents which don't even venture the direction of resolving these issues. In lieu of an accountable response, the issues instead, therefore, are whether your claims of monetary purpose are truly genuine and accountable, b, whether the cited objects are accomplished, as I was asking as I read it, otherwise, why and how would we be in the present predicament, and c, whether the inevitable consequences of your obfuscation of our currency are the product of just processes, which indeed would serve the people, which is only your intention if you acknowledge and endorse the only processes which serve the people. We know, of course, that the latter cannot be true unless the present simultaneous global monetary failure were in fact a reasonable anomaly of nature. That practically every country of the world should succumb to terminal artificial indebtedness, while natural resources remain unexhausted and we remain as disposed and capable as ever of persisting instead in the prosperity which the people remain still so capable of. We are also aware of contemporary strategies which only attempt, equally vainly, to misrepresent cause, while the fundamental cause of all the conditions before us is readily traced to your obfuscation of the currency. But if this unnatural condition of the present failure were not caused by your obfuscation of our currency, Mr. Norman, what in fact could it truly be caused by? Let us cut to the quick of this controversy. First, let us provide what for now we will only assert are the only credible answers to the questions we submitted. Proofs of these assertions will follow should you dispute them. Should you dispute any of these answers, in consideration of the evasion of your prior purported answer, we are now asking for the bank's proofs of any and every purported contrary fact. So I enumerate our 4 questions and I give the only truthful answers to each of them now, showing him what we are prepared to argue. 1. Our first question was 1. What lawful consideration do you claim the Bank of England gives up when it creates money? And I answer that for him. I say, obviously, there is none. If the bank gave up lawful consideration in its falsification of indebtedness to the bank in the course of no more than publishing evidence of our promissory obligations to each other, the debtor would have to receive so much as the acquired property from the bank itself. Instead, the purported debtor, or actual obligor, receives so much property from the actual creditor in exchange for the promissory obligation, which in turn is used as currency representing an obligation to pay and to retire principal of the related property. End of answer. 2. Our second question was, how then does the bank claim there's a debt to the bank? Well, obviously the bank does. But I answer this question as well. Obviously, even as you gave no answer demonstrating how the bank could rightly claim there is such a debt to the bank simply claims there is such a debt to the bank. The banking system never demonstrates how, in the creation of money or monetization of our production, the bank obfuscates our promissory obligations to each other into falsified debts to the bank. In fact, the probable reason the bank never provides such arguments is, of course, that the obvious inconsistencies of any false argument would engender the present opposition. End of answer. Our third question, what is the claim to interest then when the bank can do no more than absorb the costs of merely publishing evidence of our promissory obligations to each other? As we said, these run in the neighborhood where physical money is issued in the neighborhood of $2 per $100,000 of currency issued. I answered this question. Obviously, even as your cited articles fail to raise any accountable argument whatsoever, being as purported risk of principal ostensibly justifies interest, and as the principal neither represents a debt of the obligor to the bank, nor is even the rightful property of the bank, interest cannot be justified to the bank, which likewise denies interest to every real creditor. Because in fact, the only cost to the bank is the mere negligible cost of publishing no more than evidence of our promissory obligations to each other. The two monumental crimes of the purported banking system, therefore, are A, that it first launders all principal into its ever unrightful possession, and B, that it subjects the falsified debts to interest. Ramifications of this most monumental of the two crimes being addressed in our answer to the fourth question below. End of third answer. Our fourth question was, how is it possible even to maintain a vital circulation without accumulating inevitably terminal sums of debt? This is the question to ask every politician who isn't advocating mathematically perfected economy, which means practically every politician in the world. How is it possible even to maintain a vital circulation without accumulating inevitably terminal sums of debt? This is the whole crux of why the world is suffering terminal monetary failure under perpetually escalated sums of falsified artificial indebtedness. So I answered this question as well. How is it possible even to maintain a vital circulation without accumulating inevitably terminal sums of debt? As a direct consequence of this purposed obfuscation of our promissory obligations, an implicit obligation exists to maintain a vital circulation, the means of which, owing to the obfuscation, are generally only that unwitting subjects of the obfuscation are perpetually compelled to borrow further. In other words, the purposed obfuscation results in perpetual payment of interest and principal out of a circulation which at any time can be comprised of no more than some remaining principal. Only principal is loaned into circulation. Thus, the unwitting subjects of such a system cannot even continue to service even the initial falsified obligations of the finite lifespan of such a system, unless they perpetually sufficiently reflate the circulation of so much as the principal and interest they are paying out of circulation in the way of servicing any existent sum of debt. What principal they are thus compelled to borrow back into circulation as new debt, equal to the prior debt, it might be presumed otherwise to resolve, thus persists in any former sum of debt, making it mathematically impossible to pay down the sum of debt, so long as principal can and must be reborrowed, merely to maintain a vital circulation. This is why we have to understand the obfuscation of the currency. But what interest we are compelled likewise